Okay, let's talk about Skomer Island. I visited in June this year and I really wanted to share with you my experience of visiting Skomer. And I'd also really love to hear from you about your own experiences visiting Skomer. I did vlog on Skomer, but it was a very windy day. And when I was watching the footage back, I realised that you would probably struggle to hear what I was saying. So instead, I decided to sit down and chat to you, as well as sharing with you my footage from the day. I hadn't done my research about the size of Skomer Island before I went, and I was surprised to see how large it is. And it is in fact the second largest island in Wales after Anglesey. It's considered to be a very important site for wildlife because apparently it's home to over 350,000 pairs of breeding Manx and shearwaters, over 52,500 puffins, and thousands of guillemots, razorbills and kittiwakes. If you love this kind of thing like I do, you might also be interested in my visit to Lunga Island off the coast of Scotland, and if so, I will link that video below this one. Good morning. So I am in Broadhaven at the moment where I've been staying, and I'm just about to drive to the place that you park to visit Skomer Island. I've not been to Skomer before, so really looking forward to it. It's a really windy day. I did get an email very early this morning saying that the trip might be cancelled due to adverse weather conditions. And then I got a follow-up email a bit later saying that the trip is on. So I'm really glad about that because I've travelled up from Cornwall for this. I need to check in an hour early apparently, so I need to head off now and do that. After checking in, I made my way down to the beach to wait for the boat. The boat that I was catching had just returned from Skomer, and it was clear that the group of people it was bringing back were people who had stayed over on the island, which is of course an option. The people coming back on the boat were unloading their luggage off the boat, so I knew that they were those who'd stayed over. It was a sunny day, but the wind was very fierce and the crossing was quite choppy as a result, and I did see a few passengers get splashed from the waves and the sea spray. But it was a really fun crossing and I tried to get some footage of it whilst also protecting my camera. As I drew near to Skomer, the sight of puffins greeted me. They were flying in the air around the boat and also bobbing up and down on the waves in a sheltered bay. Once ashore and after climbing the steps, all the new arrivals from the boat were given an introduction talk. It was a little hard to hear the talk because of the strong winds, but I got the gist, and it was about respecting the island and its inhabitants. When visiting Lunga, we were also given a talk, but it was a lot shorter and also delivered on the boat as we approached the island. And so it was with a heart full of anticipation that I began to explore the island. My first destination was the Wick, and the reason that I decided to head for the Wick is because I had never been to the island before and don't know very much about it. And the Wick seems to be the place that people talk about as the best place to see the puffins coming into land from their journeys out to sea to catch fish. I timed my visit to Skomer to coincide with the time of year that puffins are flying in with their beaks full of fish, so I was very excited to go and observe this. The walk to the Wick was beautiful, and I think it was about half an hour, but I was stopping and enjoying the sights along the way. When I reached the Wick, it wasn't quite as I had imagined. Although seeing the puffins fly in from out to sea was amazing, something about the way that it was all organised left me feeling quite uneasy. I'd originally thought I was going to leave this out of the video because I didn't want to sound like I was moaning about my visit in any way, because I am very grateful that I had the opportunity to visit Skomer, and I overall loved the experience of seeing the bird life there. But I also want to be honest with you, and because it made me feel quite uncomfortable, I wanted to share that with you as well. The area was quite crowded and there wasn't really any space to stand. The paths in certain areas of Skomer are very narrow, and when you meet somebody coming the other way, you have to, obviously one of you has to stand to the side and the other has to squeeze past, which is fine, although in some parts the path could be widened very slightly without disturbing any puffin burrows or anything like that. There was an area where the path was slightly wider at the Wick, but it was full of photographers who had set themselves up, as well as other people who were standing aside to watch the puffins there. But it was a very, very congested area, and the space that we were given was very small considering how many people there were there trying to view and film and photograph the puffins. And the worst part of this was that puffins were flying in with their fish, and then they were hesitating because they couldn't find a way through the crowd to get to their burrows. Some even turned back and flew out to sea and tried again by coming in again. So you could see that it was disturbing what they would naturally want to be doing, which was flying in to the edge of the cliff, walking across the path, and then heading down into their burrows. Where there were gaps in the people, the puffins would make a dash for it, but as I said, it was very congested, and quite often there wasn't really a gap that the puffin could see as a safe way through. And it really worried me to see this, because it felt like being there was disturbing the puffin's natural behaviours, and I didn't want to in any way contribute to them being stressed out or them not being able to take the fish straight to their burrows. So someone who either works or volunteers for the Wildlife Trust did eventually come and start to intervene. She was keeping her eye on the puffins when they flew in, and where she could see that a puffin wanted to make its way across the path, she was asking the lines of people to separate so that the puffin would have space to get through. But some people, especially those who were busy taking photographs, weren't really paying very much attention, or they were trying to capture a quick photograph of a puffin that was very close to them before they moved aside. And the other thing that made me feel uncomfortable is that when I go wildlife watching, when I'm observing wildlife, I like to do so at a respectable distance where I'm not in any way interfering with the wildlife or disturbing any natural behaviours. And I like to be able to relax and spend time there, observing quietly and taking the time to really understand the wildlife's behaviour and enjoy learning about the wildlife that I'm watching. And it just didn't feel like the right environment for that at the Wick. It was too busy, too stressful for the puffins. Everybody was squeezing past each other, and it didn't feel like a respectable distance where I could calmly enjoy wildlife watching. Having visited Lunga not that long ago, I was also comparing my experience naturally. On Lunga, people are not channeled to certain areas of the island, and the paths are not so narrow. So people were able to spread out more naturally, keeping a respectable distance from the burrows and from the puffins. And that meant that the puffins weren't ever blocked by streams of people. And it also meant that there was space to spend time with the puffins. So, as I say, I love to observe wildlife quietly with plenty of time and space, but the Wick felt very rushed, and for the sake of the puffins, I didn't want to linger. I think that possibly staying on the island would offer a completely different experience, as you would be able to visit the Wick when the crowds have gone home for the day, and probably have a lot more space and provide a lot more space for the puffins to spend some time there. After the Wick experience, I carried on around the island, stopping along the way to observe different sights and sometimes to film. It was extremely windy, which means a lot of my footage was too shaky to use for this video, but I am sharing with you some of the less shaky clips from the day. I did find a small area where I could spend some time observing the puffins from a distance without crowds closing in, and I saw 2 or 3 gulls waiting for the puffins to fly in with fish in order to mob them and steal their fish. And it was really interesting to observe how the puffins tried to avoid this, either trying to sneak past and be unnoticed by the gulls, or flying back out to sea and trying again and trying to land directly into or next to their burrows. But I really felt for the puffins, who had been clearly working very hard to gather fish, only to have it stolen off them by the gulls, who would rather do that than go out and hunt their own fish. I ended up spending quite a bit of time on the side of the island where the boat drops you off and picks you up, because it was more sheltered this side of the island. So I spent some time there observing the puffins and taking some footage. Intrusion and the puffins being very hesitant to get to their burrows seemed to be very much at odds with the purpose of Skomer in protecting wildlife. Aside from that, there was a lot of the island that could not be accessed by visitors, which is obviously a good thing because the wildlife can be left alone to thrive there. And overall, I was very, very grateful to have the opportunity to visit Skomer Island, to explore it, to observe the wildlife there. I'd be really interested to know if you've had a similar experience to me, or if that was just a particularly bad time. So please do share your experiences with me, and I would love to hear any advice. Should I go to visit Skomer again? If I had to choose, I would probably choose to visit Lunga over Skomer for the reasons that I said before, but Skomer is a lot closer to where I live. Thank you for sharing this experience with me and for watching this video. I hope that you enjoyed seeing some of the footage that I was able to capture there, and I will see you in the next video.